Jage, Montreal. And we'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanyankahawga Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters we're meeting on, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. If you're new to Fourth Space, well, welcome or welcome back. What do we do here? Well, we work with our university community to mobilize and exchange knowledge by co-creating daily activities, conversations such as this one. So it's really our great pleasure to have collaborated with Homeroom's Black Perspectives Office Pod to make this conversation possible. A quick note, if you're on Zoom and you'd like to jump in, there will be time for a question period towards the end. So please feel free just to turn on your camera, raise a hand, make yourself seen and heard by the folks here. Otherwise, of course, the chat is activated. And if you're in the space, just give us a little wave and we'll get a microphone to you so that the folks on Zoom can hear you. Okay, that's it for me. I'll pass it over to Joel now. Welcome, Joel.
Woo! Hey. Welcome, everyone. My name is Joel Dinku, and I'm the coordinator for the Homeroom program. We're very excited and happy to host this event today. We're calling it Anti-Black Racism Task Force, discussing student-led change. So as we talked a little bit about earlier, we wanted to acknowledge, first of all, that Concordia is located on unceded Indigenous land. The Kanyankahawga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the land and waters on which we gather today, even here at the Fourth Space. So first of all, thank you to the Fourth Space for allowing us to host the event right here. And Jojake, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it's home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other people. And we respect the continuous connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relations with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And today, we will be discussing the past, present, and future and how our diverse communities can work together to create change, which was what happened with this Anti-Black Racism Task Force and everything that is to come from it and has already come from it. So without further ado, it's time to introduce our wonderful speakers. So first of all, I'm gonna start off with Vanessa Manroop, who is our student facilitator here at Homeroom's BPO pod, the Black Perspectives Office. She's also an ambassador with the BPO and a student in her final semester at JMSB in Human Resources. She was recently named one of CBC's Black Changemakers, recognized for her community work and the way she's inspiring others and helping to shape the future. So welcome, Vanessa, to the event. So this event is happening in part because Vanessa straight up asked, so what are we doing for Black History Month? So this is kind of what came from it. And at that moment, after talking about it, there is really one person we circled, and it is an absolute honor to have her with us here today. And that is here, Angélique Willkie. So Angélique, first of all, her bio is so extensive and diverse. We really could go on and just talk about that the whole hour or 2 hours that we're here. She's really doing a lot. And really thank you, Angélique, for taking the time to be with us today. She's a multidisciplinary artist and the associate professor in the Department of Contemporary Dance. She's here today as the chair of the President's Task Force on Anti-Black Racism and special advisor to the Provost on Black Integration and Knowledges at Concordia. So can we just give also a round of applause to Angélique, who's taking her time to be here today. And I will say one thing, to not just read their whole bio. I'll say one thing that's you will leave here today feeling inspired. She will leave you inspired. And she's also known as someone who always makes herself available for others. So really thank you, Angélique. I will now pass it off to Vanessa to start us off with this conversation on how students can be involved and the changes and recommendations proposed by the report. And as mentioned earlier, you will have time at the end for questions, so keep that in mind as we're going into this. Vanessa?
Thank you, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
And thank you again so much, Angélique, for being here and just sharing your time, but like your knowledge and all that warmth that you have with us here today. I want to just start off by asking you how you're doing.
How am I doing? That's such an ambitious question already. If I'm totally honest, I'm in coping mode. There's a lot going on, and I've taken it on with gusto. I'm going to try and finish it with gusto, but it requires a lot of gusto. The work of the task force, I think, is, I'm not sure I knew exactly what I was getting into. And as I think a lot of activism is, you don't start out knowing what it's going to entail. You do what you think needs to get done. And you find yourself in a place where, you know, the to-do list and the tasks related to those and the responsibilities related to those tasks define themselves. And yeah, if you need to step up to the plate, you step up to the plate. So here I am.
But you've done so well stepping up to the plate. We wouldn't have known that your task list is forever ever building. You take it on with grace, and I'm so inspired by you. I just want to start off with that. Okay, now,
Thank you.
before we really dive in, I just want to simply set the scene and give some historical context about what we'll be discussing today. I'll keep it brief in this setting. However, I do strongly encourage you all to do your own research and readings on the matter to get an even more detailed picture. So the history of the student demonstration at Sir George Williams University. So it happened in 1969. Students occupied the university's computer center on the 9th floor of the Hall building, so the building right across the street, and in protest of alleged racism at the university. Police were called on February 11th. 97 students were arrested, so maybe 4 times the size that we are in here. And this was followed by lengthy legal trials for those arrested. I thought it was also very interesting to note that the day before the protests, the Georgian, which was the newspaper at the time, the school newspaper, devoted its entire publication to the position taken by Black students and the university's response to that position. So, Angélique, in your opinion, what were the impacts following that protest?
Yeah, that question is quite broad in its way. I think there are multiple levels of impact. I think there's the impact at the time, which was on the one hand insufficient in terms of the institution and the changes that it meant here. The coming out of that, ultimately the Ombuds Office was created. But the reality is the professor who was accused of racist action was reinstated. I mean, you know, the impact, like I said, I think institutionally was limited. And that posed difficulty at many levels. The impact, of course, for the students who were arrested was catastrophic for many, not all. I think traumatic for all. Again, at different levels and manifesting in different ways. But, you know, I mean, from students who were deported, some of them not being able, there were quite a few who were from the Caribbean. If their home countries weren't prepared to pay for them to come home, there was nowhere for them to go, and they were forced to leave Canada. So, you know, there's a student, for example, who ended up in an African country because that was the place that would take him. So, I mean, you know, the impact was huge. At the time of the launch last fall, we spent a lot of time talking, myself and the provost predominantly, spent a lot of time talking to former protesters and some who had been arrested. And there are those who have managed to be extremely philosophical about it, but not without pain. And others that are still hurt and angry and where their lives were upended. That said, I think there's also another level of impact of those events, even at the time, and that's about galvanizing what was already going on in the late 60s, early 70s in Montreal around Black Power movements, Black struggle, and I think it meant that in a way, had things worked out well, that impact would not necessarily have been as great. But I think precisely because we ended up in a situation where the university called the police, the riot squad came, the arrests were made, it meant concretely that the Sir George Williams protests in certain categories, riots in another, became a kind of barometer across the country for student protest in relationship to anti-Black racism. So I mean, that's a very succinct way of expressing it, but that I think addresses the impacts at the time. I think subsequent impact, if I really link it to the work that I've been involved in over the past now almost 3 years, what rises to the surface for me was the fact that addressing those events became the anchor, the gravity point in a way for being able to justify and give credibility to any other recommendations that we might have. It would not have made any sense to recommend changes to address anti-Black racism if we weren't going to address that. And at the same time, to address that without recommendations for actual concrete action, that wouldn't have made any sense either. So there's a now impact as well that's very much central to the work that we ended up doing around the task force on the final report.
What an answer, right? Well, you brought up the task force, and I'm just going to explain it super briefly as well for those who may not know. So it was created in fall 2020, and its mandate is to coordinate the work needed to generate recommendations anchored in the lived experiences of Black faculty, staff, and students in employment policies, teaching, and learning practices. So you talked about kind of what led to the task force, but what led you to the task force?
The task force chose me. And I think the answer is, it's simple and it's not so simple as for most things.
For
I think.
everything,
But yeah,
yes.
exactly. But I think that there were a lot of things that led to my involvement. I got tenure in May of 2020, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, so what does that mean? Of course, it was a pandemic in any case. We were all at home behind our computer screens. And so I couldn't even really celebrate it. And I thought, well, what does that mean? What does it mean for me to have a permanent position in the university where unless I do something really crazy, they can't fire me, right? So what does that mean? What does that allow me to do? What does it behoove me to do? Because I took it in that sense as well. It's not just secure employment. I come from, before entering Concordia in 2015, I had only ever lived as a freelance artist. And so this is my first full-time job in my career. I mean, and I say that, still with a certain amount of resistance, the idea of having a full-time job and having to be in the same place every day. So for me, it was really, okay, but what does it mean? What is the significance for me? And as I was toying with that, unfortunately, George Floyd was murdered. And I also am raising 2 Black kids. So I had, at the time, my son was 16 years old and super angry, angrier, confused, hurt, wildly lost, I would say, after watching that video. And it made me think, okay, my son may never come to Concordia, but this is a place where I can try and make a difference. So I think if you were to ask me, why am I doing this? My first response would be my son. And how I ended up doing it, I think was really, it's a question of circumstance. Sometimes we think we choose and sometimes life chooses us. And I think the combination of not coming from academia as well meant that I had no history in this context. And I think that lack of history and a well-oiled craft in improvisation, in, finding, finding ways around, okay, so this is the rule. Well, there's loads of space in between this rule and this rule. So how do we navigate those spaces? How do we, really nursing a capacity to communicate, to adapt, to rally people around causes, to find places where it's not about taking the edge off. I mean, it's about holding to the convictions, but trying to make sure that those convictions are actually common, not individual, flag waving. So I think I happened to be there at that moment. And it became clear that, with the group of faculty, staff, and students with whom I was working, I mean, we managed to craft the Concordia Statement on Black Lives, which garnered 7,000 signatures in 2 weeks. And that really became a source of leverage for conversations with university administration.
Sure.
And from that, in the context of those conversations, I think I was the least polemic. And so that allowed space to keep going. And so I did. I mean, needed to happen. And I'm still going. I'm still not sure how, but I'm still going, yeah. But I have to say, I mean, I can't either. For me, it's not. I mean, I recognize it as activism now, but I still don't. I still don't consider myself an activist. I think we all just need to do what we need to do. And if this is the work that needs to get done, then you get on with it.
I would take that as a quote. We all just need to do what we need to do. End quote. So this project, as you mentioned, is just so great, but like great beyond means that you weren't even ready for. What were some of maybe the challenges to either get it going, get it approved?
I mean, the good news is that I, at no point, and I really reiterate that, flashing lights, blowing horns, the whole bit, at no point in the process have I ever had to convince senior leadership that this needed to happen. And I say that loudly.
Yeah.
So Graham Carr and Anne Whitelaw have been unyielding in their support, right? So without them, I couldn't do any of what I have done. So that's really important because, I do think ultimately we want to be we want to be stimulating change that is not only top down. I think that's extremely important as well. But if they were not ready to take this on and to consider it a priority for the university, then it wouldn't have been possible to rally the kind of transversal support that we've been enjoying for the past 3 years, right? So that's a first point of departure. I think the greatest challenge, first of all, we started out as 3 co-chairs.
Okay.
If anybody had said to me, Angélique, do you want to take this on by yourself? I would have run out of the door screaming, quite likely. You know what I mean? Of course not. I don't want to do it by myself. Life does what life does. The other 2 people involved both had life issues to deal with. And so ultimately there was me left. And and of course that became a driver as well to say, okay, you can't step out now, right? So I deferred sabbaticals, I stayed on, all of that kind of thing in order to make sure that this thing that we had committed to, not just me individually, but me on behalf of, senior leadership, but also the Black community who had rallied around us. This was an opportunity. And I think that even though to a certain extent, part of me thinks, we're all tired of doing the work. The work is not ours to do.
You hear that?
That's, there are words I'm not supposed to use in public, so I'm not going to use them, but, the work is not ours to do. However, the world is made the way it is. People are the way they are. And so if we do not seize this moment where, une espèce de brèche, there's a space that has opened. And if we don't take advantage of that, it'll be lost. And so I'm interested as well in leveraging again the momentum that's there in order to create more momentum, so that ultimately it's not tied to one individual, because for the time being it still is. It's about me and the work I'm doing, and that's not sustainable, right? So I think my greatest challenge has been how to champion and not be indispensable. It's super
Wow.
hard.
Yeah.
It's super hard. But I've learned loads. I've learned as well to really zero in on where I can actually make the difference. If I feel like, okay, that's not going to work so well, then don't keep hammering your head against the wall. Let go. Get back to it later. Deal with, keep opening up the space where it can open up. And it's by opening up that space that ultimately there's this kind of other reaction that happens later where, other aspects get pulled into the work that's actually becoming more substantial, more consequential, more recognized, better articulated, more supported, that kind of thing. But it's that critical piece of making sure that I can pull myself out afterwards. That's the challenge now. Now that the final report is done, that officially the task force doesn't exist anymore. So it's as special advisor that I take on the rest. But there are 88 recommendations that, move across the whole spectrum of life at the university for students, for staff, for faculty. Implementing those requires an institutional effort. But that means, Andrew has certainly heard me talk about it as well on several occasions, this idea of taking it on transversally, so that we're not looking at, okay, I'm responsible for this, so I do that. You're responsible for that, so you do that. No, how is what we're doing in dialogue with each other, and how do we create the kinds of communities of practice and this works for us, this works less. How do we help each other? How do we support each other? How do we find humility in the tasks we're taking on, so that we can actually admit this is not working? It's, in general, it's super easy to stand up on a box and say, we're doing a great job. But how do we also say, this is not working? It's not sufficient. And what can we do to just find some, space, elasticity in the institutional fabric itself, so that we can start to discover the changes from the inside, you know what I mean?
You've honestly altered like the chemistry in my brain of how I think, because I work in community a lot, and often we hit walls because we don't want to let go of the idea we had, or people become not so humble anymore, and it's those obstacles we're facing instead of the actual task at hand. But you've given me a lot to think about.
Well, if I can add something to that, Vanessa, I think one of the issues as well is, and I am, I think of my son again, in fact, I talk about him a lot, but if we get caught up in that specific thing, then we're missing other opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes by releasing here and focusing there, you actually create the possibility for this other thing that was useful, interesting, priority to reemerge and get lifted. So I think that there's institutions have square wheels. So it's true, so how do we then make it about the people who work in the institution rather than about the institution? If the people start to shift, then there's and for me that shifting is, those are the soldier ants, not the queen. It's really, this is where the shifting needs to happen, and that's where we kind of start to move we find a little bit more porosity, we find a little bit more elasticity in that, the frameworks and the parameters, so that the culture starts to change. And we're talking about it now here in the context of the work of the Anti-Black Racism Task Force, but ultimately it's about all racialized and marginalized people.
Yeah, it's applicable in any kind of setting.
Exactly.
You mentioned that there's 88 recommendations, so this document is very long, but worth the read. However, the university is committed to implementing all the recommendations. And so you actually sharing how it's about us moving around, us as students, what role can we take to ensure that it actually comes to be holding the institution accountable?
I mean, it's an excellent question, because I think that I think it's a double-edged thing. I don't want to call it a sword. But on the one hand, one of the things that I've said a lot over the course of the conversations that I've had at different levels in the university is not only how are, people receive the recommendations and they think, okay, how are these relevant to my unit or my work or my, responsibilities, whatever. And I think the other piece to that is, how do you make yourself relevant to the recommendations? So, and I do believe that those two facets need to articulate together. So on the one hand, we, and I say we now as a representative of the institution and of the recommendations themselves, the task force and recommendations, we need to make sure that we create procedures, mechanisms, structures, processes that allow you entry into the process, right? That for me is critical. For me, they're not yet in place. So part of what I'm orchestrating before I leave on sabbatical, because I am leaving on sabbatical,
Okay.
but part of what is being orchestrated is the advisory committees, that kind of thing, so that we have the possibility to be in consultation with students on a regular basis as we move through the recommendations. I think as well the creation of things like the Black Student Center, which Anne announced last week, will also become a hub for the information to circulate as well, where students have a structure that holds their voice, right? So I think that's critical. But also I feel like, because the special advisor position now exists, even if I'll be away next year, because the BPO now exists, I think it's also about taking advantage of the momentum that is there and making sure that you all speak. Don't wait to be consulted. Say what you need. If you don't do that now, then it's also a missed opportunity, right? Because there is a certain amount of momentum. People are listening. And so I think that whether it's through the BPO Student Council, through the cultural clubs and that, and that access, through the Dean of Students office, through student services, through, and student services being, the Black Student Center will function through that. Even through CSU, it's to use the bodies that exist to make sure that they are holding your voices. Don't wait, because I think one of the challenges that I encountered over the course of the past 3 years has been, almost a sense in which different groups on campus were waiting to be consulted or waiting to be invited to speak. But in fact, this is everybody's stuff. So and the reality is, there's no way, even with the 88 recommendations, I'm sure there are things we've missed. Like nothing is going to be foolproof, nothing. And so, and on top of that, priorities shift, populations shift, their needs change. So how do we make sure that what we're setting up is something that is constantly circulating, so that your voices are heard and we can react? Here's what we're working on. How does it feed you? Here's what we need. This is manifesting over here. Okay, how do we find that space? So again, to make sure that what's happening in the institution is about the people in the institution. The other thing that I think is extremely important in terms of Black student involvement is wherever you have community relationships, as in non-Concordia, right? Black community relationships, to bring those into the university. So that Concordia does not, should not exist in abstraction of the context in which it evolves. We're in Montreal. We, there's a history with the Black community here, or Black communities. There are several. There are different linguistic groups. There are different cultural backgrounds inside of that. How do we make sure, in order for us to be sure that what is happening inside of the university can speak to / with those realities outside, it's not only for the administration to engage that. As students, bring those lives into the university. And that will also, it will force us as leaders inside of the institution to respond to those relationships as well. So I feel like, it's on both fronts that I think that the kinds of priorities that we've identified through the task force need to thrive.
Just note that she gave us homework. Okay, we have to bring stuff to our university.
Absolutely, bring it in.
You mentioned the Black Student Center. I'm excited as a Black student, even though I probably will be graduating and
exactly.
yeah.
You can come back and visit.
Yes, I would like to, but can you maybe share on what we can expect? What is it going to look like?
Well, it's never existed before, so we have to make it up. And so on that basis as well, the not to flip it back to you, but again, how do we make sure that we're creating something that actually reflects you all? It's by getting you involved in the dreaming of it, right? So that's one of the reasons that we've launched the contest amongst Black students for you to contribute names, potential names. On that same forum, it also invites your input in terms of what would you want to see in that center? I mean, what kind of programming, what kind, like, you want a coffee machine and a computer? You want to have film night? Like, you need like, you want to screen a projector? Like, what is it that you need? And I feel like that is, again, it's maybe that's part of the culture shift, because there are many different facets to it. But it's what I was mentioning just before. How do you make sure that you are not waiting to be served, but also engaging so that you're part of the solution as much as seeking the solution? You know what I mean? I think that they work in tandem. So from a purely institutional and logistical point of view, Otsunakta exists, which is the Indigenous Student Center. And that gives us a certain amount of primary information, right? Gives us a point of departure of structure and the kinds of services, because and they've been doing it for much longer. Otsunakta is 30 years old. And so the history that they have dealing with their community and really finally addressing their community's needs, we'd be crazy not to be, taking advantage of their experience as we try to set something else up, for Black students. And I think also, it's an opportunity for me to mention that the circumstances of Indigenous students and Black students they're not the same, but the need for solidarity between the two groups is critical.
Yes.
Right? And not to be forgotten. So when we think in terms of Indigenous students and the histories their bodies carry, we're talking about stolen lands and stolen cultures. We think about Black students and the histories their bodies carry, not for all of them, but to a very large extent, we're talking about stolen bodies on stolen lands. There are relationships of solidarity that I think are critical to the ways in which we engage together and the ways in which that we try to support each other's endeavors, and inspire each other from what the other is experiencing and doing. And so I feel like, those are things that we can build on and must build on, so that we're not, I don't want the work that we're doing to be creating another silo. In fact, it's like we're also in the process now of doing a letter of intent for a Black Studies minor. And one of the issues with that as well was, okay, but it can't just become a box we check. Okay, there's a
Yeah.
Black Studies minor, we don't need to worry about Black perspectives in curriculum across the university.
Mm-hmm.
So in fact, what that means is that we do both at the same
Yeah.
time. So there's a minor happening, and then there's also still looking at, curriculum that in principle wouldn't, quote unquote, lend itself to Black perspectives. And how are we making sure that, that material is being opened up? What are the references being used? What are the sources? What are the case studies? What are the, what are the methodologies actually being tapped into? So, I mean, I really do think there are no, the kinds of connections that we built between the recommendations as well also speak to the strategies
Mm-hmm.
to deal with them. They overlap, not all of them for sure, but there's a certain amount of porosity, there's overlap, because it requires concerted actions. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. As you speak, the only thing that pops up to me is safe space, community, welcoming. And I'm going to do a shameless plug and say that we here at Homeroom and at the BPO, we do our best to do that for Black students on campus. And I see that for the Black Student Center as well, just being a safe space. I can also speak to that because I've created safe spaces for young Black girls through a book club called Black Girls Gather. But I kind of want your take on what's the importance of having a safe space, a welcoming, culturally woke, as the young ones say, community spaces, and how does that support our health and our wellness for us, especially as Black students?
Again, I'm going to think in terms of raising my own children. I mean, I grew up in Jamaica where, I was about to say everybody looks like me. No, they don't, but they do. In the sense that there are all kinds of other differences that we, every society has its own differences, but I never had to question ever my sense of belonging. And watching my own children grow up in a predominantly white environment, that is something that is constantly visiting them, constantly. And it manifests in very different ways, whether it's, Mom, can I go to work with my hair like this? You know what I mean? My son, of course, like running home at 8 o'clock at night from the metro because he decided, oh, well, I'll race the bus. And I have to say to him, next time, walk. So for me, the need for a space speaks to the fact that we live in a society that is not safe. That's what that speaks to. And so being in an environment of learning where ultimately in an ideal world, of course, the whole university should be safe, right?
Right.
But I think that even as we try to accomplish that, we need to not be blind to the need to exhale, the need to just be with, you laugh at the same things, you shoot the shit about other stuff, and those things are real. They're real, and they enhance our ability to learn. They also enhance our ability to contribute and to feel value for others as well as for ourselves. And so I feel like if what we're offering to students, some students might never even put their foot in there, but knowing it exists already speaks to something. Yeah. And so I feel like it's about offering a place, a haven, just an exhale spot, and that where I think because there are so many biases that manifest in so many different ways in the broader society, right? So who knows, you might need academic help and you have a hard time asking for it.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden in a room with other Black folk with whom you can say, yeah, this is hard for me too. Where you don't have to do that and think, yeah, I'm doing fine. Well, it's okay to not do fine, but you need to be, in order to be able to admit that things are not going quite so well, you need to be in a place where you feel you're not going to be judged for that. The help is there. the support is there.
Mhm.
So for me, that's the value and that's the need. And that need has been there for a very long time. You know, one of the facets of student life that really manifested as a gap is for international students, because they often get they get lost in the cracks. They don't have community when they're not from here. Some of them master the language, some not. You know, and they get quickly caught in the cracks. And to just create a space where, okay, you know, just this is yours. I think is, with all of the cultural, I use cultural, but in a broad sense, not in a narrow sense, diversity that Black communities are. Because that for me is to be celebrated. But there are very few contexts at the university that really allow us to not be celebrating that in our respective silos, but one more time, to celebrate that together. Here is the just enormously rich, you know, space that is Blackness. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
No, it truly is. And honestly, just you talking and bringing up the idea of, I just start to feel more safe. Like, you know, it's like it's already working. But honestly, thank you for sharing all of that. It's really touching and a lot to think about. I also would just like to open the floor for anybody who might have a question for this amazing jewel that we have here today. It could be anything at all.
I want to say thank you for having this wonderful discussion, which is very much needed for our community. And thank you for sharing your experience and also what's going to happen in the community. This is my second semester here. Coming here, I was looking for other Black perspective or other association so that I could feel safe and as well, but I didn't see a lot of them.
Oh, there are.
But I'm glad that there's changes that are coming. And I wanted to ask, for the new program, the Black Center, what are some of the programs or some of the things that we will be discussing? Could you give us a little hint on what we can expect?
I can give you a little hint. I mean, you know, bearing in mind that it doesn't exist yet, of course, and so the like any other similar project, it can only come into being by doing it, right? So it's not about it will do this, and this. No, it'll be what we make it together. So there are, I mentioned Otsunhakta, which is the Indigenous Student Center, and for sure, some of the examples that we have taken, you know, that we have heard in a way from their experience are related to academic counseling, for sure, mental health, potentially career-oriented mentorships as well, to be seen what form that can take. I mean, none of it is defined yet. I mean, it's all evolving as we discuss it. And I think that you know, up until now, the BPO has been involved in a lot of workforce students. There will have to be as well a kind of division of labor in terms of the kinds of programming that the BPO will keep and the kinds of programming that will step into the student center. So all of that is still to be defined. But we're also talking about, again, community engagement somehow in that center, so that it's also an opportunity not only to build community amongst Black students, amongst themselves inside the university, but to use the Black Student Center as again, leverage is the word that comes to mind, but to build community relationships, because those are mentorships, those are professional opportunities potentially. Those are a place to say, you know, that, yeah, gather together, come down to the community center, or come, you know, I mean, those are places of, again, anchors in terms of a sense of belonging, etc. So, and then the students themselves who will be involved in the center are in a position, I think, to generate the kinds of programming they're interested in having there. So, you know, whether you end up doing film night or a hair weekend, you know what I mean, where we all get together and we braid, that, yeah, but it's, you know, we snicker over it. But of course, in our cultures, that's a gathering place that is, you know, there's so much that's shared. So we come from, I mean, you know, I certainly do, I mean, come from an oral tradition. So what are the contexts that we create that allow those traditions to live, you know, to be part of our lived experience, where we're just sharing. And I think those, creating that kind of gathering space allows us as well to yeah, kind of undo some of the barriers and the rigidity with which we have to function, you know, both in this institution and more broadly. So, I mean, that answers your question without answering it fully, because it's evolving. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, all of that, it's not until September. There are no hires yet. You know, the people who are actually going to work in that center still need to be hired. The people who are hired will also determine, to a certain extent, the kind of programming that will initiate it. Bringing the students in there will fine-tune that even further. So I would say, if you haven't filled out that form yet, get onto it, right? Offer a name possibility, but even beyond that, like, what would you want to see in there? And no idea is a bad idea. No idea is too small. You know, if it's even to say, it would be great to have somebody in there who just sits with us while we do our homework. It's huge, man. It's huge. You know, where you could just sit down and think, okay, this is, you know, there are, you know, twice a week, there are study moments where we come together for 2 or 3 hours and we're all in there and we're just working. But there's a camaraderie, there's a mutual support. That doesn't cost anything. It's just about saying, hey, this would be helpful for me. So really, you know, when you were asking Vanessa earlier, what, you know, like, how can students get involved? That's a small thing, but, you know, like, express your needs, articulate them. Don't wait only to be offered, right? Actually say, this would help me. And, you know, those are the considerations, in fact, that we can embrace easily and quickly.
Again, I say, just do what you need to do.
Just do what you need to do.
Anybody else?
So first of all, thank you. You shared a lot of insightful things with us, and I'm really glad to have, you know, met you, quote unquote, so, you know, I can know more about how the university is planning on evolving. But my question to you is, how do you guys plan on affecting or influencing and contributing to non-Black communities? Like, is the group gonna focus, not focus, but like try to have an impact, or, you know, improve how other communities work and how they view Blackness and whatnot? Like, is there gonna be any type of, you know, influence on those type of things?
I mean, for sure, I will say, if you haven't, you know, it's almost 100 pages, but it's brilliant.
1,000%.
Do read the report, right? And I would even say, if you have the possibility, you don't have to take that on alone. Do it in groups. You know, say you read it over the course of the semester. Like, you know, I mean, dig in. This is your stuff. You know, I, along with some 50 task force members over the past 3 years, you know, we've accumulated information from conversations with Black Concordians, community leaders, as well as other sectors of Concordia, the Concordia community. This is your stuff. And so you need to know it. And that's not a finger wagging moment. It's really just, if you want it to be relevant to you and you to be relevant to it, then it also means investing in knowing what's in it, right? So very specifically to your question, I think that one, as I mentioned earlier, I think, there are quite a few recommendations, et cetera, that exist in the context of an anti-Black racism task force and recommendations that, come out of that, but they apply to racialized students or marginalized groups across the university community. And I think it's not realistic for me, particularly, it's not realistic for me to take on dealing with all of that. But by dealing with what I can deal with, there's a porosity through the institution. Yeah. So it creates the space for others to express their needs as well. It creates the space for us to find solutions that are applicable to other groups on campus. I mean, the reason I mentioned solidarity as well with the Indigenous community at Concordia is because if we can do what we do, it's also thanks to what they have done. Right? So we mustn't have any illusions. We're not inventing the wheel. We're not, the decolonization efforts that Concordia has committed to is about the entire institution and everybody in it. You can't, there's no way it can be otherwise, I think. So, of course, it's super easy to say and a lot harder to do. I recognize that. But I do think, there are, as part of the recommendations, there are various training modules, for example, that are to be developed. Some of them are already being developed, and others will, they take time, and we have to consult outside of the university, et cetera. But the creation of the equity office is the equity office is key in holding that. But it means then that, whether it's de-escalation techniques and anti-discriminatory practices for campus security, or the looking at biases in hiring, et cetera, that are specific to HR situations, or the creation of bridging programs that are going to be specific to the Black community and where those Black communities are. I had a conversation just 3 days ago where we're actually thinking, okay, then maybe there's that idea, but maybe we actually need to engage in looking for some money and setting up programs like earlier than CEGEP, earlier than high school, right? So that kids are coming into the university, so that this is not some foreign space for them. This is, so I mean, I'm hopeful that there is positive contamination in a way that will take place, a better kind of virus than the one we've been living with for the past couple of years.
Amen to that.
But, I do think that if we start, the recommendations are so broad in their scope that there's no way that we can implement them without them impacting the communities that are around those recommendations as well. So, the recommendations are organized in 4 broad themes. One is driving institutional change. Another is supporting Black flourishing. Another is supporting Black knowledges. And the last one is encouraging mutuality. And all of those speak to the entire Concordia population. They can't not, Does that answer the question a little bit?
Don't be shy.
Is there anybody on Zoom? No, but Anna would have told us already.
Yes, she would have.
One last question. So you were saying that we were looking at the Native Indigenous community for more, and we were looking at their program. I was just wondering if we're looking at other institution, like other Black institution or other universities that also have been through this problem. Do we also seek the help to get more understanding, or even, I know that the problems are not the same, but we can also look at what they have done, and then from there we can learn more. Is there a need for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the question is multiple, and so is the answer, in the sense that, you know, let's face it, if Concordia is doing this, it's because other universities are doing it as well. Like, you know, we're not, on va pas se
We're
voler la
not
face, quoi.
special.
No, right? How we do it and what we do with it is about us. But the fact that we're doing it is not about us, I don't think. So the two things that I would want to highlight in there is that, so one is that over the course of the 2 years that the task force was doing its thing, there were 6 subcommittees who were working across different facets of the university. And there were loads of consultations, not only inside of this institution, but also the looking at what was going on in other universities, right? So whether that was from how to deal with campus security, to curriculum content, to student supports, mental health, hiring practices, that kind of thing. So by the time we got to the place where we were crafting the recommendations, they come out of extensive research and consultations. And that research piece is going from Stats Canada all the way down to, you know, I mean, talking to the Vanier CEGEP program in Black Studies, right? So and looking outside of this province as well, because that reality is very different. The Quebec context is very specific. But it's important as well that Concordia is part of this social fabric, but this social fabric is part of a larger social fabric. And our students don't only come from Quebec or reinsert themselves only into Quebec. So, you know, we have to navigate the Quebec context and at the same time prepare you all for functioning in a broader context. So I think there's that piece, just to know that consultation has been part of it. But then the other thing that I would want to mention is the fact that Concordia is a signatory to what is known as the Scarborough Charter. And the Scarborough Charter is a national agreement. There are over 50 universities, and well, not necessarily all universities. There are universities, colleges, etc., but all post-secondary educational institutions that have signed on to this document. And it's the Scarborough Charter on, yeah, we all call it the Scarborough Charter, but I think the next little part is actually states anti-Black racism, but it's looking at anti-Black racism in Canadian post-secondary education. The fact of having signed on means multiple things. The Charter gives it's also another document that's worth, you know, it's online, it's totally available. To take the time and go through it is worth it. It gives historical context to Canada's Black population. And then it also looks at the situation of Black people in university education, post-secondary education in Canada, where the lacks are and where it should be. And the recommendations are clear. So everybody who has, well, all the institutions, because it's not just people, but the institutions that sign on to that charter have committed to public scrutiny nationwide. They have committed to engaging in their own local processes. So developing policies, procedures, recommendations, et cetera, that are specific to their contexts, but that are seeking actively to improve the lot of Black Concordians, faculty, staff, students. So those recommendations include increasing numbers across the board in all categories, increasing the presence, not just the presence of Black knowledge presence is the right word, of Black knowledge in the university, and anchoring it as not just something that's peripheral. Yeah, how do we make Black knowledge central to what the university defines as knowledge? You know, so the charter really deals with all of those aspects, plus just the social and you know, I mean, the well-being of the Black community. And so the signing on to that is super important. The existence of the document is enormous, but the signing on to it is significant. And we, you know, we call on each other, like, you know, in terms of support, we also call each other out. That's, you said you were going to do that, you didn't do it. It's not happening. So, okay. And I think that's a necessary part of the process. It's a necessary part of the process. It is also the opportunity for Black scholars, Black university leaders to come together across the country. And that is an enormous trampoline, yeah, that we have to embrace actively. Oh, Andrew.
The one and only.
I don't have a question. I just want to beseech you to remember what you all do best, which is find each other and start groups and make events happen. Like, use what you already have. Bring yourselves in, like, you'll move us, right? This all started because of students way back when. And don't forget, right? There are lots of student groups. If you want to start one, you come to our office. Just get stuff happening. Just get it happening. It's fun. Just get it happening. And that'll start moving all of us, right? That'll start moving the system. We'll help you do that. But there's lots of groups.
Yeah. And there's more support out there than you imagine. You know, there are all kinds of ways to craft support. Support can take all kinds of different forms as well. So, you know, push us.
We'll take the challenge.
I'm sure you will.
I want to end on this super serious question. So we know you're an artist, dancer, drama. I want to know if there's any type of art that you haven't touched yet that you are going to do.
That I am going to do. I'm going to practice stillness during my sabbatical. I'm going to work on that. I have an image of a warm rock and a lizard. And I'm going to do the lizard. I could just do that. Immobility is super complicated for me. For those who know me, it's a real challenge. So I consider that an art.
Yes, definitely.
And I'm going to tackle that.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Wasn't the answer I was expecting, but
I'm
I like
sure.
it. And on that note, I will invite Joel back up to close us off.
Awesome. So again, thank you so much to everyone that came today, for those on Zoom. And again, special thanks to our two speakers today. Hope that you were able to really just grasp some of the wisdom and knowledge that we were able to have here. And to finish off, we'd just like to have Vanessa has something for you, Angélique.
You've planted so many seeds in us today, and people always talk about not giving much appreciation. And so we just wanted to give you your flowers for dropping all the knowledge and the wisdom and the inspiration that you've given us today. Thank you so much. I know that we've all been touched and changed after today's conversation. So much.
Thank you. So for everyone here, so this is our time for our discussion. Feel free to grab some snacks. We have the space until 6. So feel free to grab some snacks and talk with each other, mingle, and that's a wrap for today. Thanks so much.
That's a wrap.
Yay. Thanks, Joel.